Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final installment of our webinar series for test prep. This one is going to be on the GMAT. My name is Julia Mosconi from the Indigenous Education Incorporated staff, along with my colleague Milani Fox. We'd like to introduce you to Jay Rosner from the Princeton Review Foundation, who will be talking to you about unmasking the GMAT. So without further ado, Jay, take it away.
Thank you, Julia. In this webinar, I'm going to try to give you about 50 minutes or so of the best information I can give you on the GMAT, approaching the GMAT, things to think about, ways to prepare, etc. So let's get right into it. We're talking about unmasking the GMAT here. And I'm going to start with what I think are the most important 5 or 6 slides that you saw last week, just by way of a little bit of review. What does the GMAT measure? I want to make sure that you remember these slides. Here's my opinion of what the GMAT actually measures. Does it measure how intelligent you are? I say no. Does it measure how well you'll do in business school? I say no. It does help a little bit in predicting first-year GPA. And as I said in the last webinar, that's something, but it's not a lot. I'm underwhelmed by that. So the whole concept of the GMAT predicting how well you'll do in business school, not really. A little bit of prediction for first-year GPA. Does the GMAT predict, or does the GMAT measure how good you are at the GMAT? Yes, it does. That's what it measures. So if you have a great GMAT score, it means you're good at the GMAT. If you don't, you can take steps, and that's smart preparation, which I'll be talking about, to improve your score. So we have some survey questions here. Can we do a polling question on this so we can see who's in the audience tonight?
Yeah, of course. So if everyone wants to look off to the right-hand side of their screens here, we've got a poll all set up. So if you take just a couple seconds to click on which one you most relate to, we can report back to Jay here. All right, looks like we've got a pretty fair mix here, pretty equal. So go ahead, Jay. We can kind of just go off of assuming that we've got a pretty equal spread here.
Sounds good. Our next point is who has taken an official GMAT. Can we poll the audience on that to see what the situation is?
Sure thing. We'll give it about another 10 seconds or so. All right, we're looking at, it's pretty similar to the last one, equal across the board here.
Okay, thank you. And our third point here, and we're only going to do polling questions on this particular slide, so bear with us. Are you worried about pre-calc on the GMAT? Do we have a polling question on that, or should I just talk about that?
Why don't you just go ahead and talk about that one?
Okay. If you're worried about pre-calc on the GMAT because the GMAT has a math section, let me ease your mind. There is no pre-calc on the GMAT. It is arithmetic, some algebra and geometry, and charts and graphs. Those are the essence of the concepts and the topics tested on the math part of the GMAT. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then we have the topic of affirmative action and Native students. And I think we have a polling question on that one, don't we?
We do. Why don't you just go ahead and explain kind of a quick rundown about affirmative action and how that does affect Native students?
Sure, be happy to. I think this is an important topic. I run across lots of Native students whom I ask, can you explain affirmative action to me? And they say, no, I really can't. And I think it's important that all students understand affirmative action, and particularly Native American students. Affirmative action, it's also called race-conscious admissions. It's a method that has been used by almost all United States colleges and universities in undergraduate and graduate programs for almost 50 years. Now, it's been under attack. So and it has survived an attack. The Supreme Court in the Fisher case just a couple of months ago strongly stated that affirmative action is fine and is okay to use to be used by admissions offices in colleges and universities and undergraduate and graduate programs throughout the country. There is an exception to that general rule. That applies to 42 states. There are 8 states that took state action, typically ballot initiatives, where they prohibited their state universities from using affirmative action. California is one of those states, for example. So if you apply to a business school in California, that's a state university, like the University of California at Berkeley Business School or the University of California UCLA Business School. Those schools cannot use affirmative action, and that's because of a state ballot initiative. As I said, universities in 42 states can use affirmative action according to the recent very strong Supreme Court decision. What is affirmative action? What is race-conscious admissions? It's a method that tells admissions officers that they can give a small or slight break to underrepresented students, African American students, Latino students, and Native American students. So the admissions offices can give a slight break. And what that means is they can give you a slight break, a slight allowance on test scores, or a slight break or a slight allowance on GPA in the admissions process. It's not a large break, it's a small break. And the reason for that is Native American students are woefully underrepresented, as you know, in all of higher education and in business schools. So using affirmative action allows the business school admissions office to give a slight break to Native students and hopefully have a few more Native students both admitted and matriculating. Our universities and our business schools have way too few Native American students in them, and this allows, I believe, is very good public policy, and I'm very much an affirmative action, race-conscious admissions advocate to get more students into all of higher education and to business schools. Affirmative action has been under attack, and the most recent attack in the Fisher case a couple months ago was brought by a young white woman, Abigail Fisher. She sued the University of Texas, claiming that the University of Texas, because it used affirmative action, because it gave a slight break to Native American students and African American students, discriminated against her because she's white. And, you know, the claim that a white person is being discriminated against is kind of absurd on its face, but the courts took this seriously. And the University of Texas at that time admitted everyone who finished in the top 10%, and this is on the undergraduate level, I should say, admitted everyone who finished in the top 10% of their high school class. So all Abigail Fisher had to do was finish in the top 10% of her high school class, and she would have been automatically admitted to the University of Texas. She did not. Her grades were not good enough for that. Then there was a second avenue that she had to get into the University of Texas, where they used affirmative action, and she didn't get admitted that way either. So she had two shots at the apple, didn't get admitted, filed a suit saying she was discriminated against because she was white. And the Supreme Court decided a couple of years ago that a couple of months ago, I'm sorry, in the Fisher case, that she lost, that she wasn't discriminated against because she was white, and that the use of affirmative action was just fine by the University of Texas. They use affirmative action to try to get more underrepresented students admitted to their school. So one of the consequences of Abigail Fisher losing that case was there was a hashtag that developed that went around, Becky with the bad grades. And some folks think that's a little harsh. I think it's well-deserved. Here's a young woman who was goaded in by some wealthy backers to file this anti-affirmative action lawsuit, which was, I believe, absurd on its face. And the fact that she might be embarrassed by being referred to as Becky with the bad grades going forward, I happen to think is not too harsh. It's well-deserved consequence for what she did. The moral of the story, I hope you find that humorous. I do. The moral of the story is in 42 states, all the public and private universities can use affirmative action. In the other 8 states, private universities can use affirmative action. The public universities cannot. And I and affirmative action advocates will be working in those 8 states to try to get affirmative action reinstated. So hopefully now, as a native student, if somebody asks you about affirmative action or race-conscious admissions, you can not only describe what it is, a little benefit, a little break given to underrepresented students, but you can also talk about Becky with the bad grades. So next slide. How much GMAT prep is recommended by Jay? You remember this slide? I'm just reviewing because it's so important. 2 to 3 hours a day, 5 to 6 days per week, 7 to 8 weeks, right up to the test, 4 to 5 practice tests. You know that I said, and you recall, that I emphasized that if you do less than that, you're setting yourself up to get lower than your best score. If you do a lot more than that, you may burn out. You want to be very, very careful that you don't burn out. Now, the getting your best GMAT score involves a performance. You remember my analogies to a rehearsal for an artistic performance or training and practice for an athletic performance, a game, a match, a meet, what have you. And you might recall that I said this time period is significant, it's substantial, it's not going to kill anybody, it's a little more than a half a season of a high school sport, and it's what you need to do to get your best score. So I suggest that you do it. And then there's the wonderful medicine wheel from my friend Frank Edowagishik of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, who not only gave me permission to use this with Native students, but encouraged me to use it with Native students. The 4 elements that I have bolded here on Frank's medicine wheel are elements that I've been talking about for years, that students need to pay attention to be able to optimize their situation with those elements, to be mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually at the top of your game when you go in to take the test. And each of you knows how to do that, and it's different for each of you, but you know what you need to do, and you need to do that, which puts you in an optimal situation with regard to those factors to go in and get your best score. And then Frank encouraged me to emphasize that his tribe has seeking balance on the top of this medicine wheel because they feel that's actually the most important element on the medicine wheel. The individual elements are important, but what's most important is that they're kept in balance. So I thank Frank for contributing that to my presentation. Another review, PACES, and we can put this whole slide up. You remember the acronym. P stands for a good preparation plan, A for acting and implementing your plan, C is for confidence and calmness, E is for energized, that you're ready in all of those ways to put in 3+ hours of your best work and get your best score. And safety and security, that results from having a backup test date that, in fact, you'd rather not use because you want to knock it out the first time. So I thought that this merited a review to refresh your recollection on this, which I call my second most important slide that I showed you last week. So some GMAT basics. First of all, you might recall that I said last week that it's a computer adaptive test. For those of you who haven't taken the GMAT, for those of you who had taken the GMAT, you remember this. Those of you who haven't taken the GMAT, when you're taking the GMAT, a question appears on the screen, and you must answer that question to get to the next question. There's no skipping. You only see a question once. You never see it again. If you have to guess, you have to guess to get to the next question. So the frequency of the GMAT, it's offered in testing centers that look like computer labs any day of the week, all year long, minus holidays. I do have a suggestion for you. I think of myself as an afternoon person. I'm sometimes a little groggy in the morning. It takes me a while to wake up. I don't drink coffee because I don't want to wake up quickly. I kind of want to ease into the day. Even though I'm an afternoon person, when I schedule a test like the GMAT, and I last took the GRE, I schedule it in the morning. Even if you consider yourself an afternoon person, most people, assuming that they get a good night's sleep, have a little more energy in the morning if they need to. And believe me, if you're walking into the GMAT, you'll realize that you need energy. So I suggest that even the afternoon people among folks on this webinar strongly consider scheduling their official GMAT for 8:39, 9:30 in the morning. You're likely to have a little more energy if you intend to have more energy for that particular testing experience. And believe me, you'll intend to have more energy. Now, the duration of the GMAT, a little over 3 hours. The sections, quantitative, which is math, verbal. There's a writing section and an integrated reasoning section, and I'll talk a little bit more about that and those things in subsequent slides. By the way, if you have any questions or comments, just type them into the chat box, and we'll deal with questions toward the end of the webinar. Cost is $250 for the GMAT, but there are fee reduction or fee waiver provisions. Look them up. I don't memorize them. They change from time to time. Just look them up. The one watchword is do the fee waiver procedures early, a couple months before the test that you're thinking about, because it might take some time to complete those procedures. The maximum score on the GMAT is 800, and I'll talk a little bit more about that scoring in subsequent slides. So 2 of the sections on the GMAT are verbal and quant, and here's a description of what they look like. The quantitative or math section has 37 multiple choice questions. You have 75 minutes. So if you do a little division, you have about 2 minutes a question, which means if you spend 3 or 4 or 5 minutes on any one question, you're not going to have the time to spend on questions after that question that you would like, and you may be negatively impacting your score. So part of your test prep on the GMAT is learning pacing and realizing that if you're a minute into a question and you think, well, this is really hard, I'm not sure I can get it, this might take me 3 or 4 minutes to work this out, you're probably better off just guessing and getting to the next question. You don't want to expend the amount of time in any one question that prevents you from getting to other questions. There's another thing that's important on the GMAT that I don't have a slide on, but is very worth talking about. And that is there is a penalty for not finishing a GMAT section. So you want to finish the section. Also, the first 8 or 10 questions have slightly more impact on your score. So I want to slow down a little bit on the first 8 or 10 questions. Now, the question that I often get is, okay, Jay, should I slow down? Should I emphasize slowing down on the first 8 or 10 questions, or should I emphasize finishing the section? Because they work somewhat in opposition to one another. And the answer is, it's not either or, it's both. And that's what test prep is about. Test prep is spending 7 to 8 weeks being conscious of and trying to get better at slowing down a little bit, not a lot, a little bit on the first 8 or 10 questions, trying to make sure you get them correct, and then speeding up appropriately so that you can finish. You don't have to exactly finish. You can get within a question or two of the end, but you should try to do both. It's not either or both. And test prep gives you the time to practice doing both. Practice tests give you the opportunity to practice doing both. So on the quantitative, you'll see test general knowledge of arithmetic, basic algebra, basic geometry. When you look at a GMAT math section, you'll see charts and graphs also. No calculators allowed. So if you're very calculator dependent, you will then get very calculator independent in your GMAT test prep. Verbal section, 41 multiple choice questions, 75 minutes. You can see the topics are grammar, logic skills, and ability to answer questions about a reading passage. Reading comp, a passage, 6, 7, 8, 10 paragraphs followed by questions. You've seen it on the SAT. You've seen it on the ACT. If you took the GRE, you saw it there. You'll see it again on the GMAT. So that's the verbal section. The other two sections, integrated reasoning and writing. Integrated reasoning is 12 multiple choice questions. Most require multiple responses. So it's a little bit different, 30 minutes. It tests your ability to make inferences based on data presented in charts, graphs, and tables. So this is almost exclusively charts, graphs, and tables, where you'll get a little bit of that on GMAT Math. A calculator is provided. And these questions are unusual enough that, well, they're charts, graphs, and tables. You've all seen charts, graphs, and tables. But to get a good feel for what these questions look like, you just have to look at a practice GMAT and look at them. Better that than my trying to explain what they look like to you. This is very important. The integrated reasoning score is a separate score. I'll talk about scoring later. It is not a part of your math and verbal scores, and those are the most important scores on the GMAT. Now, the final section of the GMAT is the analytical writing assessment. It's one essay topic. It's analytical typing, actually, because you're typing into a computer. You're writing an essay. It's 30 minutes. And it's an analysis of an argument or on business or topic of general interest. So those two sections, we have a little glitch on this slide. I hope the other bullet points come up. Yeah, we can put the whole slide up. Good. The overall GMAT score is 200 to 800, with a national average score a little above 500. The quant and verbal sections have subscores of 0 to 60, theoretically 0 to 60. It's very rare that someone gets a score below 10. It's very rare that someone gets a score below 50. So you'll get a subscore between 10 and 50 typically. And that just gives you a sense of whether you're stronger or weaker, relatively speaking, on math or verbal. Both math and verbal are part of the overall score, but if you just got an overall score of like 550, you wouldn't know what the math and verbal breakouts are and where your strengths and weaknesses on those sections are relative to one another. Integrated reasoning is scored 1 to 8, it's not included in the overall score. And the analytical writing is scored 0 to 6, also not included in the overall score. The most important score that B schools look at is the 200 to 800 score. B schools that are very quant oriented will then look at your quant subscore. And the integrated reasoning is a score that's new enough. I'm not sure, it's only been around several years. I'm not sure exactly how much weight the B schools are giving to that number, but whatever it is, it's less than the other numbers. And also analytical writing is given less weight. Now, by saying integrated reasoning is giving less weight and analytical writing is given less weight, you don't want to have embarrassing scores for those sections. So your goal on those sections is to get reasonable scores, and your goal on the quant and verbal is to get your absolute best scores. So most of your prep will be on the quant and verbal sections. You don't want to blow off integrated reasoning. You want to get a good score. You don't want to blow off analytical writing. You want to get a good score. You certainly don't want to get an embarrassing score. You don't want to draw attention to those scores. But where the B school admissions officers are really looking is at, first of all, the overall GMAT score, and then many will give considerable weight to the quant subscore. Now, in terms of GMAT scores and scoring curves, pencil and paper tests have more consistent curves. They're not accurate. They're not meaningful, just more consistent. In other words, there's a considerable variability in GMAT scoring curves. And I'll tell you now a story of, so the official scoring curves, I think, are sort of approximate. And the practice test scoring curves, when you take practice tests online with any practice tests you encounter by private companies, for example, that have practice tests, and even the GMAT's own practice tests, those scoring curves are really approximate. And I say that, and here's a story that illustrates that. Got a call from a guy, and this is, by the way, a very unusual call that I got. I got a call from a guy whom I had been talking to about GMAT prep. And he said to me, Jay, I took the test and I got a great score. And I said, congratulations, I'm happy for you. How'd it go? And he said, well, it went great, but I do have a concern. I have a question. I said, what's your question? And he said, well, I got a 710. I said, that's a terrific score. Congratulations. And he said, yeah, I'm really happy with that. But here's my concern. None of my practice scores were over 670. I got pretty consistently 650, 660, 670, and now I got a 710 on the official test. Is something wrong? Should I be concerned about that? And I smiled and I said to him, well, you probably don't recall it, but I said to you at some point months ago that not only are the practiced test scoring curves approximate, really approximate, but even the official scoring curve is approximate. In my opinion, it can vary by like 30 points. Now, don't make that argument to an admissions officer because they don't want to hear it. They're just looking at your score. But you should know that based on my experience, I think there's like a 30-point variability in even official scores. So that guy might have gotten sort of a 680, but 30 points higher, 710, that can happen. And so I said to him, why don't you just sit on your 710, be happy with it, and understand that the scoring curves are approximate. And he was happy with that answer. I'm not sure that many other students would have asked that question. So practice GMAT scores are very approximate. And as I said, practice GMAT scores can vary by 30 to 50 points, I think. And official GMAT scores, I think, can vary by a good 30 points. Don't bother making this argument to admissions officers. They're just going by the points. So the concept here is to prep well, get your best score, and with luck, you'll get a little positive swing of the curve. You may get a little negative swing of the curve. So if you go in saying, all my practice tests are 600, and I should get a 600, and you get a 570 or a 580, I think that's kind of the same as a 600 given the flex and the scoring curve. But again, don't bother making that argument to an admissions officer. This is just something for you to know. So, thinking about GMAT questions. So you're at the test, and there's a question on the screen. And the first question that you typically get in any section is kind of a mid-level difficulty question. And what a computer adaptive test like the GMAT does is if you get that question correct, it gives you a slightly more difficult question next. If you get it wrong, it gives you a slightly easier question next. Now, if you're taking the official GMAT and you're trying to figure out whether this question is harder or easier than the last question, you're really thinking about the wrong thing. You're spending brain space and brain energy thinking about something other than how do I get the correct answer to this question on the screen as quickly as possible. That's all you should be thinking about. So the kind of trying to assess whether the next question is easier or more difficult is actually a distraction. And if you think about that, your score is going to be lower because you're going to be distracted. So part of your practice testing is to not think about that. Now there's a curveball here, and that is while the computer adaptive test mechanism pitches you a harder question if you get it correct, if you get the question in front of you correct, or an easier question if you get it wrong, there are also experimental questions filtered in. So your next question may not be harder or easier, it may be an experimental question, a question they're testing out, a new question. So you may be trying to figure out whether the next question is harder or easier, and it's an experimental question. It's not even indicative of how you did on the last question. So you can see, A, it's a distraction, and B, you may be trying to figure out something where it's an experimental section and it's entirely irrelevant to whether you got the previous question correct or incorrect. So that's the way of thinking about questions that you have to adjust in your test prep. So another point here, do you find yourself thinking about the last question or trying to remember it so you can figure it out later? Again, you're spending brain space on something that's not relevant and that distracts you and takes you away from getting the correct answer to the question on the screen. So again, you have to train yourself not to think about that stuff, and that's what you do in your test prep. Why are you creating distractions, I ask? Don't distract yourself. Your focus is 100%, how do I most quickly get the correct answer to the question on the screen without making a careless error, period. That's all you think about. And that's what you think about on the next question and the next question and the next question. Also paying attention to paying some attention to pacing. Am I moving quickly enough to get to the end of the section? That's the only other thing you're thinking of, pacing. So, one of the things that I said before is if you have a question on the screen and you know you're not going to be able to answer it in less than 4 or 5 minutes, you just guess, you move on, and you have to feel positively about that. You're saving time for other questions. Once you hit that button, question is gone forever. Don't think about it. Practice not thinking about it. Do you think about anything else other than getting the correct answer quickly to the question and how's my pacing? Because if you think about anything else, you're thinking about the wrong stuff, and you need to train yourself not to. Take a breath, refocus, whatever you need to do, but please don't distract yourself. Next slide. Here's, before we put this question on the screen, let me just say a word or two. I'm going to show you a slightly unusual GMAT verbal question. Most of the questions are like reading comp that you've seen before and sentence correction stuff that you've seen before. You may have not seen this critical reasoning verbal question. So in a moment, I'll put it on the screen, but we're not putting it on the screen so that you'll listen to me, because once it's on the screen, you'll start reading it. When we put it on the screen, read it, and I'll talk about answering it. I'll just give you a little taste of the question that the kind of question you may not really have seen very often before that exists on the verbal section, and something you'll want to do, if you're uncomfortable with something like this, particularly, you'll want to do some extra test prep on this type of question. So let's look at the question. Okay, let's keep the answers off now. Here's the question. The answers will come next, but I'll give you a chance to read the question. I'll be quiet for a moment here. Okay, let's not put up the answers yet. Okay, you've read the question, and then, or you've read the very short passage here. And the question is, the argument above relies on which of the following assumptions? So we can put the 5 answer choices up now and let folks look at those. And I'll give you a minute. You would normally get about a minute 45 seconds to do a question like this on the GMAT. I'll give you maybe a minute to look at this, try to pick an answer, and then I'll tell you what the correct answer is and what the reasoning is. Okay, you've had about 30 seconds to look at the answers. I'll give you another 15 or 20 seconds, and then we'll discuss. Try to pick a correct answer if you can. Okay, you've had almost a minute to look at the answers. Let's talk about this. The key to getting the answer to this question is animal products. This is about animal products. It's about removing meat, which is an animal product, from one's diet. So the first question, so the argument above relies on which of the following assumptions. So it's highly likely to be an assumption about animal products. A, increasing the amount of vegetables and grains in one's diet can contribute to better health. Maybe. I actually strongly believe that's true, but it's not relating to animal products in the argument above. So that's incorrect. B, there will be no corresponding increase in the amount of dairy products in the diets of those who are eliminating meat. Well, that's pretty interesting because it deals with animal products, because dairy products are animal products. If you didn't know that dairy products were animal products, they are. And you kind of need to know that to answer this question. So the question talks about reducing the amount of animal products in one's diet and then eliminating meat. Well, an assumption is that by eliminating meat, you're reducing the amount of animal products. But if you increase the amount of dairy products, then eliminating meat may not reduce the amount of animal products. So there's an assumption, that is an assumption, built into the argument that there's no corresponding increase in the amount of dairy products. So that directly impacts the argument. That's actually the correct answer. Let's look at the rest. C, most food writers believe that some amount of animal products is necessary to a health diet. It should be healthy diet. I copied this directly from the GMAT website, so that might be a mistake on the website. The amount of animal. So here it's it does refer to animal products, but it's about food writers' belief, and that's really irrelevant to the argument. D, not all healthy lifestyles require a vegetarian diet. That doesn't address animal products. And E, many people who do not eat animal products make decisions for health reasons. Well, that at least addresses animal products, but it's not an assumption that directly affects this argument. The argument is about people moving to a diet that eliminates meat, and then whether they do that, and it says some people do that in order to be healthier, but what this particular answer choice involves is the reason many people might make any decisions, and that's really not relevant. It's outside of this argument, talking about why many people do something rather than an assumption about why some people do this. So B is the correct answer there. We can go to the next slide. And I just gave you a little taste of this kind of question, and you can see that you might need to or want to do some extra practice on those kinds of questions, since it's a little bit unusual, and those kinds of questions don't tend to pop up on, well, they weren't on the SAT, they weren't on the ACT. How to best use practice GMAT tests. I'm suggesting you take practice, I have GRE in there, and I should be GMAT. I'm sorry about that. Take practice it's the same for GRE, but take practice GMAT tests about once every 10 days to 2 weeks. Why? You want to carefully analyze and work on your weaknesses and strengths between the tests, and you want a regular exposure to building stamina, to practicing pacing, and getting your full test checkup. Now, you can always afford to spend 5, 10, 15 seconds to refocus, to skip questions. But going down to the bottom here, more important than your practice test score is the number of correct and incorrect you are getting on the various question types. But let me talk a little bit about my refocusing technique. I have a primary refocusing technique that I use, and everyone should develop a refocusing technique. And what a refocusing technique does is it helps you refocus at the test. And a typical way that a lack of focus will arise, and I've talked to a lot of people, and the large majority of people experience this, and I experience this. I read a sentence. I'm at a standardized test, taking a standardized test. I read a sentence. I read a second time. I read a third time, and I say to myself, I don't know what that's saying. And it's not because the words are too complex. It's just not going in. I'm distracted. I'm just not focused. Something is going on. I need to refocus. What I do is I take a deep breath, close my eyes, try to clear out my brain. I'm trying to kind of psychologically get a distance from the test, even though it's sitting there on the computer in front of me. And I know that I'm going to open my eyes in 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds, and I'm going to be ready to read that sentence and have it go in. And that almost always works for me. And that's my primary refocusing technique. You need to develop a technique, and this you do in test prep. Let's go back to the last slide just for another moment. You need to develop a refocusing technique, and this is what you do in test prep, so that when you're at the test, you have a technique that you can use to help you refocus. And it needs to be something you can do while you're seated, and it needs to be quiet because you're in a test center, you're taking a test. So if it involves closing your eyes, breathing, kind of tensing your muscles, whatever kind of thing that you can do to actually sort of remove yourself from the test-taking zone and then re-enter that zone with a renewed focus so that you can be efficient and effective and not read that sentence for the fourth time when it won't go in. Okay, we can go to the next slide now. First steps in beginning to think about taking the GMAT, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got GRE in my brain since I left that mistake on the last slide. I apologize. If you're thinking about taking the GMAT, you're not serious until you take a practice test under test conditions, score and analyze that test, and use the results to inform your decisions. You want to develop a test prep plan that fits your needs. So somebody who comes up to me, oh, by the way, and again, GRE there where it should be GMAT, although it applies to both. GMAT scores are good for 5 years, so why wait? Somebody comes up to me and says, Jay, I'm going to be taking the GMAT. I'm just starting to think about it. And I say to myself, I wonder if they're serious. And then I find out. I say to them, have you taken the practice GMAT yet? The answer, no. My comment is, well, you really should talk to me when you're serious about taking the GMAT, and I'll know you're serious about taking the GMAT when you call me up and say, Jay, I've just taken the GMAT practice test. Then I know you're serious. Until then, you're talking about taking the GMAT. You're not serious. So you need to take a GMAT practice test. And if you think you're going to take the GMAT a year from now, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, no harm in taking GMAT practice tests right now and seeing what your strengths and weaknesses are. It'll give you a little bit of a sense of where you're at right now. So I encourage you to do that. So if you're serious about taking the GMAT, take a practice test. Now, I use a lot of athletic and artistic analogies and metaphors because people understand those domains and they don't understand the testing domain. So let's say you have an important run coming up. And I'm going to make an analogy to test prep here. You will do long-term and short-term prep for that run. And you could do long-term and short-term prep for your important test that's coming up, your important GMAT. You'll do a training program if you're doing a run to build your strength and skills and stamina. And as I've explained to you, the test is a physical experience also, so you'll do a training program to build your strengths and skills and stamina to take the GMAT. Some folks say to do no short-term test prep. I don't know what they're thinking about. They couldn't be more wrong. It's incredibly important to do the 7 to 8 weeks of rehearsal. Basically, folks are saying, oh, you have an important artistic performance, don't rehearse. You have an important game coming up, don't practice. You'll be fine. No one would tolerate those comments in an artistic domain and in an athletic domain, but those comments for some reason are tolerated in testing, which are bizarre to me. People just don't understand. You want to peak your performance without burning out. More is not always better. You probably remember the visual I gave you on that last week. And you want to work hard, but don't obsess. There are different approaches to doing an important run, preparing for the test. I'm a very relaxed, laid-back guy, but when I get into the testing room, I'm a machine. I tap into all that proactive energy that I have hidden beneath my laid-back layer. It's there. You have some of it too, no matter how laid-back you are. You can be proactive when you need to be. I'm suggesting that in your test prep, and particularly at the GMAT test, you need to be as proactive as you can be, because the test is about getting as many correct answers as quickly as you can in a relatively short period of time. So being energetic and proactive helps you get your best score. What is preparing intensively long term? Long term, if you have more than 6 months to prep, I'll make a few suggestions here. If you have a kind of a long-term lead to the GMAT, do you need a reading review or a math review or both? How would you know? You take a practice GMAT and see where your strengths and weaknesses are. If your weakness is on the verbal end, on reading, here are some suggestions that I have. You want to do daily practice over a period of many months. That's why I said 6 months. This doesn't help to do this for a month. You need to do this over time. Daily practice with material like, I like the New York Times editorials and op-eds, particularly the op-eds, because the op-eds are typically just a little bit longer. The op-eds are on the page opposite the editorial page. They're typically 4 articles that are usually a little bit longer than GMAT reading comp passages. But they're at a very similar vocabulary level, and they're on all different topics, just like GMAT reading comp passages. So that becomes very good practice if you do that in a disciplined way, 35, 40, 45 minutes a day, almost every day for a period of months. You'll build your strength of reading if you're reading for comprehension, if you're reading carefully so that you can explain what you've just read in the op-ed to someone else. And you want to sit there with a dictionary and look up all the words you don't know, because you'll build your vocabulary that way. And then for vocabulary, there's a good book that I like, WordSmart, that has vocabulary words that appear on standardized tests, lists of them, and can help you learn them. So if you want to build your vocabulary, do work on that. Again, this doesn't benefit you unless you do it for months. Let me say one more quick word. The Sunday New York Times book review every Sunday is up a notch in difficulty from the op-eds and from the GMAT reading comp sections, because it's written for a highly literate audience. And so the vocabulary level is higher, and the pieces tend to be longer. They're usually a half page to a page in length, so they're longer than GMAT reading comp sections. But if you want to kick it up a notch in your practice, that's a good source. They're also complex because you have the opinion of the writer of the review, and you have the opinion of the author of the book they're reviewing, and there's typically conflict and tension between those two views. So it's higher level vocabulary, more complicated. If you want to work somewhat with some harder material, you can ease yourself into some of those. On the math side, there's a book that I like called Math Smart 2, actually. And what it does is it reviews arithmetic, algebra, and geometry, basic algebra, basic geometry, that you should refresh yourself on before you study GMAT math, because it goes into concepts like fractions, decimals, percents, ratios, the kinds of things that GMAT math books assume that you know. So that doesn't require 6 months, maybe a month to work with a book like Math Smart, but it's the month before you do GMAT prep. So these things are done before your 7 to 8 weeks of short-term prep, right before the GMAT. Next slide, please. So there are many things you can control and a few you can't. By the way, I see we're at the end of the hour, but I only have another slide or two, I think, and then we'll take a few minutes for questions, so we won't go much over here. You can determine to a great extent these things: how much and how well you prep, when and where you take the test, the kind of snacks you eat at the test. You can control a lot about your, maybe not a lot about your work, but whatever you can control about your work, do it. Whatever you can control about your family, do it. You can control a lot about your friends. You have a good friend, you can say to them, look, I'm preparing for the GMAT. I can't socialize with you for the next month until the test, but let's get together and celebrate after the test. I hope you understand. And if it's a good friend, they will say, I support you, I fully understand, and I'm looking forward to that celebratory dinner or drink or whatever we're going to have after the test. You can control a lot about your friends. And you can control a lot about your physical, mental, emotional, spiritual condition that you have going into the test. And I suggest you want those conditions to all be optimal. So there's a lot you can control here, and take control of whatever you can. Here's something you can't control: the wording of the questions that appear on the screen in front of you at the GMAT. You can't control that. But you know the types of questions, you've practiced on them, you've taken all the practice tests you need to take, you're ready, you're prepared, even though you don't know the exact wording of the question. That's out of your control. What is in your control is the great preparation that's going to enable you to deal quickly with that question and get the correct answer. So the moral of this story is to control as much as you can control. Don't engage in self-sabotage. Don't let other people or other situations take control of your test prep. You want to exert as much control over it as possible, and as much control over the GMAT, the official GMAT, as you can. So, a quick slide on cramming. We can put this whole slide up. A GMAT prep course is 7 to 8 weeks or more of cramming, and if you're doing self-prep for the GMAT, you get a really good GMAT test prep book, and you get access to GMAT questions online, and you're preparing yourself. You're doing 7 to 8 weeks of cramming. You want to strive for some balance. Remember Frank's admonition, that's important. But unlike some college courses, you must do the full 7 to 8 weeks. You must prep hard from day one. If you kind of ease into this and do 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of kind of half-baked prep, and then you figure, oh, I'm going to kick it in the last 3 weeks, you're doing 3 weeks of prep. You're not doing 8 weeks or 7, 8 weeks of prep. You need to do a full 7 to 8 weeks. You can't cram a cram course. This is cramming for the test, and you need to prep hard from day one. Your plan should make sense with good reasons for everything you do. So be careful about what people say. And let's end with this slide. And after this slide, we can go to the last Cobell slide. There's a lot of misinformation floating around about the GMAT. Be careful. Even well-intentioned people will give you tips and suggestions that are just wrong. And that's because they don't know. They want to help you. They have bad information. So if you hear something from someone and you're not sure about it, simply email me and say, Jay, I heard this. Is this right? Is this accurate? Should I do this? Please don't do anything with regard to GMAT prep if you don't understand why you're doing it. There are good reasons for everything that I'm telling you here. I can explain those reasons to you. Yet someone might say to you, you know, you really should do this. And you might think, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should. And if they can't explain to you why, you should ask me before you do it. Everything you do in prep should make sense with good reasoning to support it. So we're a few minutes over here. Let's take questions. And I'm going to encourage folks specifically, if you've heard something about the GMAT that you're not sure about, maybe it sounds a little weird, you're just unclear on it, type that into the chat box, and I hope we have a question or two here that we can finish off on. And in the meantime, if you want to put the last Cobell slide up, that would be fine. Any questions?
As of right now, we only have one question, and that is, what can you tell us about the consortium and one test for all programs?
Well, the consortium is, I've done some work with the consortium. I'm on the faculty with the head of the consortium at Graduate Horizons. So what I can tell you is this consortium is a great program that provides scholarships. Go to their website, check it out, apply if you qualify. So the consortium is a great resource for scholarship funding. I didn't quite understand the second part of that question.
I don't know if they can get a little clarification on that question from whoever asked that. It just says, what can you tell us about the consortium, and one test for all programs?
One test for all programs. Well, if you take the GMAT ones and get your best score, that's the score you send to all the programs to which you apply. I don't understand why anyone would want to send more than one score to a program. Although I should mention that when you apply to a B school and authorize that your scores are sent, all your GMAT scores within the last 5 years are sent. So they'll see all the scores, even though the large majority of B schools just consider your best score. But yes, you take the score. The goal is to take the GMAT ones, get your best score, and send that one best score to all the programs you apply to, all the schools you apply to, all the scholarship programs you apply to. If that was the intent of the question, then I've answered it. But I hope I'm understanding the question correctly.
I believe you did. They just sent a clarification asking, will my test score work for the whole consortium?
Oh, sure.
And I believe you just answered that.
One great test score, which is your best score, works for everything.
Wonderful. Well, unless we have any other questions, I think we're just about wrapped up here. Jay, do you have any last minute remarks before I kind of sign us off?
Well, thanks for Cobell. Thanks to the wonderful Cobell folks who made this opportunity possible for me to give you what I think is the best information that you can get to help you on your path to your best GMAT score. Just encourage you to follow my suggestions, to ask me questions about them. If you don't understand something, you can email me at jayr@review.com. And I thank you for your time tonight in listening to this. My final comment is we need more Native folks in B school. I hope you get your best score, go to B school, graduate, and add to the world. Do good things with your MBA degree. We need more Native students doing that. We need more Native students in B school. Well, thanks.
All right. Thanks so much, Jay. And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. This wraps up our webinar series on test prep. If you've missed anything or like to get more information, please follow us on our Facebook account or email us at scholarships@cobellscholar.org. Or like Jay said, email him at jayr@review.com. And with that, we will bid you good night. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and we will hopefully talk to you soon.